The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and reached for Jake. His side was empty, still made up from the night before. Right, he'd stayed at his parents' house to help with some renovations. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept towards the noise. "Jake?" I called out tentatively. "Is that you?" No answer. As I rounded the corner into our living room, I gasped. My mother-in-law, Martha, stood amid a sea of broken picture frames, family photos scattered across the hardwood floor. "Oh, Claire," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so sorry, dear. I was just trying to straighten these photos, and they all came tumbling down." I blinked, trying to process the scene. "Martha, it's 6 a.m. How did you get in?" She waved a key in the air. "Jake gave me a spare, in case of emergencies." "Of course he did." I bit back a sigh and forced a smile. "Well, let me help you clean this up." As we gathered the broken glass, I noticed Martha scrutinizing each photo. She'd looked at one of Jake and me on our honeymoon. "Oh, Claire, you really should have worn a hat. The sun's so aging on the skin." I gritted my teeth. "I'll keep that in mind for next time." The front door opened, and Jake walked in, looking surprised to see us. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Martha beamed. "Just helping Claire tidy up, sweetheart. You know how disorganized she can be." I opened my mouth to protest, but Jake cut in. "That's so thoughtful of you, Mom. Isn't that nice, Claire?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "Oh, shoot. Dad needs help with the drywall. I've got to run back." "But you just got here," I protested. "I thought we were having breakfast together." He kissed my cheek absently. "Rain check? Mom, you'll keep Claire company, right?" Before I could object, they were both gone, leaving me alone with the mess and a growing sense of unease. Later that afternoon, I visited my parents. Dad was having one of his good days, alert and chatty as we sat in their sunny kitchen. "How's married life treating you, Pumpkin?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. I hesitated. "It's an adjustment." Mom patted my hand. "That's normal, dear. Your father and I had our rough patches, too." Dad chuckled. "Remember when your mother thought I was having an affair with my secretary?" Mom swatted his arm playfully. "How was I supposed to know you were planning my surprise party?" Their easy banter made my heart ache. Would Jake and I ever have that? My phone buzzed with a text from Jake's sister, Sarah. "Family dinner at our place tonight. Don't be late." I showed it to my parents. Dad frowned. "Bit short notice, isn't it?" I shrugged. "That's Sarah for you." Mom squeezed my hand. "You go on, dear. We'll be fine here." As I drove to Jake's family home, my stomach churned with anxiety. These dinners always felt more like an inquisition than a family gathering. Martha answered the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Claire, darling, come in, come in. We were just talking about you." I stepped inside, the tension palpable. Jake, Sarah, and Thomas sat around the dining table, their conversation dying as I entered. Sarah's saccharine voice broke the silence. "So, Claire, when are you and Jake planning on giving us some grandchildren?" I froze, caught off guard. Jake looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Martha chimed in. "You're not getting any younger, dear. Tick-tock!" I felt my face flush as I struggled to find a response. This was going to be a long night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. I stared at my reflection in the bridal boutique's mirror, my heart sinking. The wedding dress I'd dreamed of since childhood hung limply on the rack, replaced by a monstrosity of tulle and sequins that Martha and Sarah had insisted upon. "Oh, Claire, you look absolutely divine," Martha cooed, clapping her hands together. Sarah circled me like a shark. "It's perfect. Jake will be speechless." I caught my mother's eye in the mirror. Edith's face was a mask of concern, but she remained silent. We both knew this wasn't the dress I wanted. "I'm not sure," I began, but Martha cut me off. "Nonsense. This is the one. We'll take it," she announced to the saleswoman. My stomach churned. "Wait, I haven't decided." "Claire," Sarah interrupted, her voice sickly sweet, "don't you want Jake to be proud? This dress is a statement. It says you're part of our family now." I felt the walls closing in. Where was Jake? He'd promised to be here, to support me. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Sorry, can't make it. Trust Mom and Sarah's judgment. Love you." I blinked back tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Later that evening, I confronted Jake at home. "You said you'd be there. This is our wedding, Jake, not your mother's." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, I'm sorry. Work's been crazy, but Mom and Sarah know what they're doing. They just want what's best for us. What's best for us? Or what's best for them? I countered. Jake's eyes hardened. Hey, that's not fair. They're family. And what am I? I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Days blurred together as wedding preparations spiraled out of control. Martha and Sarah steamrolled over every decision, from the venue to the menu. Jake remained frustratingly passive, always siding with his family. One afternoon, I escaped to my parents' house, seeking solace. I found Dad in his favorite armchair, looking more frail than I remembered. What's wrong, Pumpkin? He asked, patting the seat beside him. I collapsed next to him, the dam finally breaking. Through tears, I poured out everything, the dress, the plans, Jake's indifference. Dad listened, his face growing stormy. This isn't right, Claire. A marriage is about two people, not an entire clan. Mom brought us tea, her worry evident. Have you talked to Jake about how you feel? I nodded miserably. He just doesn't see it, or doesn't want to. Dad squeezed my hand. Then maybe it's time to consider. A coughing fit interrupted him, violent and prolonged. Mom rushed to his side, fear etched on her face. I'm fine, Dad wheezed, waving us off. But the pallor of his skin told a different story. That night, I returned home to find Jake, Martha, and Sarah huddled over seating charts in our living room. There you are, Martha exclaimed. We've decided to invite the Johnsons. I know you wanted a small wedding, but they're such good family friends. Something in me snapped. No, I said firmly. The room fell silent. Jake looked up, startled. What? I said no, I repeated, my voice stronger. This is our wedding, Jake, ours, not your mother's, not Sarah's. And I'm done letting them run roughshod over everything I want. Martha gasped. Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. Jake stood, his face a mix of confusion and anger. Claire, what's gotten into you? They're just trying to help. I met his gaze, a cold realization settling in my chest. If you can't see what's happening here, Jake, then maybe we need to rethink this whole thing. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Martha and Sarah exchanged triumphant glances, thinking they'd won. But as I looked at Jake, seeing the conflict in his eyes, I knew this was far from over. Our wedding day loomed, and with it, a decision that would change everything. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stood before the mirror, encased in the gaudy dress Martha and Sarah had chosen, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Mom said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I forced a smile. Thanks, Mom. A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Jake, looking handsome but troubled. Can we talk? He asked, his voice low. Mom squeezed my hand and slipped out, leaving us alone. Jake's eyes roamed over me, taking in the dress. You look different. This isn't me, Jake, I whispered. None of this is. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know things haven't been easy, but it's just one day. We can get through this. I felt a flicker of hope. So you understand? I understand that my family can be a bit much sometimes, he said carefully. But they mean well. Let's just get through today, okay? My heart sank. He still didn't get it. The ceremony was a blur of faces and voices. I said my vows on autopilot, barely registering Jake's words. As we walked back down the aisle, Martha's triumphant smile made my skin crawl. At the reception, I found myself cornered by Sarah near the cake table. I hope you realize how lucky you are, she hissed, her smile never wavering. Jake could have done so much better. I felt something snap inside me. Is that so? I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Then maybe he should have. Before Sarah could respond, I grabbed a handful of cake and smashed it into her face. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Jake appeared at my side, his face a mask of shock and anger. Claire, what the hell? I looked at him, then at the stunned faces of his family, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I turned and ran, ignoring the calls behind me. I found myself in the garden, gasping for air. Jake found me there, his tie askew and cake frosting on his sleeve. What's going on with you? He demanded. You've embarrassed us all. Us? I echoed. There is no us, Jake. There's you and your family, and then there's me, alone. His face softened. That's not true. I love you. Do you? Do you? I challenged. Because loving someone means standing up for them, supporting their choices. When was the last time you did that for me? Jake's silence was deafening. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. I won't live my life trying to please people who will never accept me. What are you saying? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I slipped off my wedding ring and pressed it into his palm. I'm saying goodbye. The shock on his face almost made me waver, but I steeled myself and walked away. As I reached the garden gate, I heard Martha's shrill voice. Jake, what happened? Where is she going? I didn't stay to hear his response. I kicked off my heels and ran, my ridiculous dress billowing behind me like a parachute of broken dreams. Hours later, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought I'd left behind. Mom brought me tea, her face etched with concern. What happens now? She asked gently. I took a deep breath. I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. A commotion downstairs made us both start. Dad's voice, usually so weak lately, boomed through the house. You have no right to be here. Get out! Mom and I rushed downstairs to find Jake standing in our living room, looking lost and angry. Dad stood before him, trembling with fury. Please, Jake pleaded, his eyes finding mine. Claire, we need to talk. I stepped forward, placing myself between Jake and my father. No, Jake, we don't. It's over. As I ushered him out, I caught a glimpse of a car idling at the curb. Martha sat in the driver's seat, her eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. I closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the day crashed over me. This was just the beginning, I realized. The real battle was yet to come. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing as I saw Mom's name on the screen. Claire, it's your father. Mom's voice trembled. He's had a stroke. We're at the hospital. I was out the door in minutes, my mind a whirlwind of fear and worry. As I sped through the empty streets, I realized I hadn't even told Jake where I was going. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I searched for Dad's room. I found Mom slumped in a chair outside, her face pale and drawn. How is he? I asked, breathless. She shook her head, tears welling up. It's bad, Claire. The doctors, they're not sure he'll make it through the night. My world tilted on its axis. I steadied myself against the wall, trying to process the news. Can I see him? Mom nodded, squeezing my hand as I entered the room. Dad lay still, tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. He looked so small, so fragile. I took his hand, willing him to open his eyes. I'm here, Dad, I whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Days blurred together as we kept vigil by Dad's bedside. Jake called several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that my world was falling apart while he was busy planning Christmas with his family? On the 5th day, as I was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair, I felt a slight pressure on my hand. I opened my eyes to find Dad looking at me, his gaze weak but aware. Pumpkin, he rasped. Tears streamed down my face as I called for the nurse. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was hope. As December crept closer, Dad's condition improved enough for him to come home. I threw myself into caring for him, grateful for every moment we had together. One evening, as I was helping Dad with his physical therapy exercises, Jake showed up unannounced. Claire, we need to talk, he said, his face a mix of concern and frustration. You've been ignoring my calls. Christmas is in 2 weeks, and we haven't even discussed our plans. I stared at him, incredulous. Plans? Jake, my father almost died. He needs me here. Jake's expression hardened. I understand that, but my family is expecting us. We can't just cancel Christmas. I'm not canceling Christmas, I said, my voice rising. I'm spending it with my parents. Here. But what about my family? Jake demanded. They're your family too now. I felt something snap inside me. Are they? Because when my father was fighting for his life, where were they? Where were you? Jake flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. I tried to be here, but work. Save it, I interrupted. I've made my decision. I'm staying here for Christmas. You're welcome to join us, but I won't be going to your parents' house. Jake's face clouded with anger. You can't just make that decision without me. We're married, Claire. We're supposed to be a team. Are we? I challenged. Because lately, it feels like you're on a different team altogether. We stared at each other, the gulf between us widening with every passing second. Finally, Jake turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Dad's voice, weak but determined, broke the silence. You did the right thing, Pumpkin. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. I sank into the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. I know, Dad, But why does doing the right thing have to hurt so much? He squeezed my hand. Because it's worth it. You're worth it. As I sat there holding my father's hand, I realized I was at a crossroads. The life I had built with Jake was crumbling, but something new and uncertain was taking shape. Christmas loomed ahead, not as a celebration, but as a battle line drawn in the sand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't back down. Not this time. The call came at 3 a.m., shattering the fragile peace I'd managed to find. Mom's voice, broken and raw, told me what I'd been dreading for weeks. Claire, he's gone. Your father, he's gone. The world tilted on its axis as I fumbled for my clothes, my mind a whirlwind of grief and disbelief. I didn't even think to wake Jake as I rushed out the door. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. Mom sat in Dad's favorite armchair, clutching his sweater to her chest. I knelt beside her, words failing me as we clung to each other, our shared sorrow a tangible thing between us. As dawn broke, reality set in. There were calls to make, arrangements to handle. I moved through the tasks mechanically, each one a painful reminder of Dad's absence. It wasn't until late afternoon that I remembered to call Jake. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice hollow as I explained what had happened. Hours passed with no response. As evening fell, I tried again, only to be met with Martha's shrill voice. "Oh, Claire," she said, false sympathy dripping from every word. "Jake told us about your father. Such a shame. But you understand we can't change our plans for the charity gala tomorrow night, don't you? It's been in the works for months." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Martha, my father just died. Surely Jake." "Jake knows his responsibilities," she interrupted. "I'm sure your mother can handle the details. Family obligations come first, after all." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, rage and disbelief warring within me. Mom found me like that, still frozen in shock. "Claire? What is it?" I told her about the call, watching as her face crumpled in pain and anger. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The next day passed in a blur of funeral preparations and well-wishers. Jake remained conspicuously absent, his silence a deafening roar in the quiet moments. It wasn't until the evening of the wake that he finally showed up, looking uncomfortable in a suit that screamed charity gala rather than grieving family. "Claire," he started, reaching for me. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to be here sooner, but—" I stepped back, out of his reach. "But what, Jake? Your mother's gala was more important than being here for me? For my family?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "It's not like that. You know how important these events are. I couldn't just—" "Couldn't what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Couldn't be a husband, couldn't support your wife when she needed you most?" Jake's face hardened. "That's not fair. I'm here now, aren't I?" "Now?" I laughed bitterly. "Now is too late, Jake. Where were you when I was making funeral arrangements? When I was holding my mother as she cried herself to sleep? Where were you when I needed you?" A hush fell over the room as people turned to stare. Jake shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. "Claire, please, let's not do this here." "Why not?" I challenged. "Are you afraid people might see who you really are? A man who abandons his wife in her darkest hour for a party?" Jake's eyes flashed with anger. "That's enough. I won't stand here and be insulted. I'm leaving." As he turned to go, I felt something inside me break. "If you walk out that door," I said, my voice deadly calm, "don't bother coming back." He paused for a moment, conflict clear on his face. Then, without a word, he left. I stood there, surrounded by sympathetic murmurs and pitying glances, feeling more alone than ever. Mom appeared at my side, her hand warm in mine. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," she whispered. As I looked around the room at the faces of those who truly cared, who had shown up when it mattered most, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. Dad was gone, and with him, the last threads of my marriage were unraveling. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do next. It was time to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. The house felt empty as I returned from Dad's funeral, my grief a heavy blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Mom had decided to stay with her sister for a few days, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the echoing silence of our family home. I fumbled with my keys, pushing open the front door only to freeze at the sight before me. A thick manila envelope sat on the entryway table, Jake's neat handwriting stark against the brown paper. With trembling hands, I tore it open, my heart pounding as I scanned the contents. Jake wanted a divorce. The world tilted sideways as I stumbled to the couch, the papers clutched to my chest. How could he do this now, when the wound of losing Dad was still so raw? My phone buzzed incessantly, Jake's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, unable to face his voice. Instead, I listened to the message he left, his words washing over me like ice water. Claire, I'm sorry it had to be this way, but after everything that's happened, I think we both know this is for the best. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing our assets. Dividing our assets. The phrase echoed in my head, and suddenly a terrible realization dawned on me. Dad's inheritance. Jake's family had always been oddly interested in my parents' finances. Could this be why? Panic rising in my throat, I called my mother's lawyer, Robert. I need your help, I said, my voice shaking. I think Jake and his family might be after Dad's money. Robert's voice was calm, steadying. Claire, breathe. We'll figure this out. Come to my office first thing tomorrow. The night passed in a blur of anxiety and sleeplessness. By dawn, I was at Robert's office, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline. I've reviewed the documents, Robert said, his face grim. It seems Jake is indeed trying to claim a portion of your father's estate as marital property. But don't worry, we can fight this. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. What do I need to do? First, we need to secure your assets. I'll file a temporary restraining order to prevent Jake from accessing any joint accounts. Then we'll prepare our counterpetition. As I left Robert's office, a plan forming in my mind, I spotted a familiar car parked across the street. Sarah, Jake's sister, sat behind the wheel, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. I marched over, anger fueling my steps. Enjoying the show, Sarah? Did Jake send you to spy on me? She smirked, not even bothering to deny it. Oh, Claire, you should have known better than to think you could take on our family. Jake's told us everything about your father's money. We won't let you keep it all to yourself. Her words confirmed my worst fears, but instead of crushing me, they ignited a fire in my chest. Watch me, I hissed, turning on my heel. Back at home, I began packing, throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. I couldn't stay here, not with Jake's family watching my every move. As I zipped up the bag, my phone rang. Mom's voice was frantic on the other end. Claire, someone broke into the house. They've ransacked your father's study. My blood ran cold. Mom, are you okay? Did you call the police? Yes, they're on their way. But Claire, your father's safe. It's empty. The safe, where Dad kept all his important documents, including his will. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Jake's family wasn't just after the money. They were trying to erase any evidence of Dad's true wishes. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, with my father's legacy under threat, I made a decision. I wouldn't just fight back. I would scorched earth this situation. Jake, Martha, Sarah, they had no idea what they'd unleashed. As I grabbed my keys, ready to race to my mother's side, a steely resolve settled in my bones. This was war, and I intended to win. The doorbell's shrill ring pierced the tense silence of Mom's living room. I exchanged a wary glance with her before approaching the door, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw Martha and Sarah, their faces masks of false concern. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. What do you want? Martha's saccharine smile made my skin crawl. Oh, Claire, darling, we've been so worried about you. I stood my ground, blocking their entry. Save it. I know what you're really after. Sarah's eyes narrowed. We just want to talk, Claire. Can't we come in? No, I said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Martha's smile faltered. Very well. Shustat, we've come to discuss your father's estate. Jake tells us there might be some complications. I felt a surge of anger. Complications? You mean your attempt to steal what rightfully belongs to my mother and me? Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and threatening. Be careful, Claire. You don't want to make an enemy of us. Too late, I spat. Now get off my property before I call the police. As they retreated, Martha called over her shoulder, This isn't over, dear. We'll see you in court. I slammed the door, my hands shaking. Mom appeared at my side, her face pale. What are we going to do, Claire? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Robert, my lawyer. Claire, we've got a problem. Jake's family is contesting the will. They're claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made his last revision. My blood ran cold. That's ridiculous. Dad was perfectly lucid until the end. I know, Robert sighed, but they've somehow gotten hold of medical records suggesting otherwise. We need to move fast. As I hung up, a terrible thought struck me. The break-in at Dad's study, they must have found something there. I turned to Mom, determination stealing my voice. We're not going down without a fight. I need you to tell me everything you remember about Dad's last days. Every conversation, every decision. For hours, we pored over documents, piecing together a timeline. As night fell, a knock at the door made us both jump. To my shock, it was Thomas, Jake's father. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. Claire, I need to talk to you. It's important. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He collapsed into a chair. His shoulders slumped. I can't do this anymore. Martha and Sarah, they've gone too far. Hope flared in my chest. What do you mean? Thomas took a shaky breath. They forged those medical records. Your father was never evaluated for dementia. It's all a lie. My mind raced. This could change everything. Thomas, would you be willing to testify to this? He nodded, looking years older. Yes, it's time I stood up to them. As Thomas left, promising to meet with my lawyer the next day, I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. My phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Hello? Jake's voice, cold and unfamiliar, filled my ear. I hope you're happy, Claire. You've turned my own father against us. Jake, this has to stop. You know what your mother and sister are doing is wrong. He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. Wrong? The only thing wrong here is you thinking you can win. We've got resources you can't imagine. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you have a penny to your name. The line went dead, leaving me shaken. I turned to find Mom watching me, her face a mix of fear and resolve. What now? She asked softly. I squared my shoulders, a plan already forming in my mind. Now, we fight fire with fire. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. As I dialed Robert's number, ready to set our counterattack in motion, I realized this was more than just a battle over Dad's inheritance. It was a war for justice, for family, for everything I held dear, and I was ready to risk it all to win. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving Mom and me standing in front of our new home. A fresh start, miles away from the chaos Jake's family had brought into our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Ready? Mom asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. More than ready. As we unpacked, my phone buzzed incessantly. Jake, Martha, Sarah, all leaving increasingly frantic messages. I ignored them, focusing on creating our new sanctuary. It was past midnight when a crash downstairs jolted me awake. Mom's frightened voice called out, Claire. Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I'd kept by my bed and crept downstairs. The sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. Martha, Sarah, and Thomas stood in our living room, surrounded by shattered glass from the window they'd broken. Thomas looked terrified, but Martha's eyes gleamed with manic determination. Where is it? She hissed. Where's Milton's will? I raised the bat, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. Get out of our house. Now. Sarah lunged forward, but I swung the bat, stopping inches from her face. She stumbled back, shock replacing her usual smirk. Claire, Thomas pleaded, this has gone too far. Let's just talk. Shut up! Martha snapped. She turned to me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little bitch, after everything we've done for you. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Mom appeared beside me, her phone in hand. I've called the police, she announced, her voice stronger than I'd heard in months. Panic flashed across their faces. Thomas made a dash for the broken window, but tripped, crashing into a side table. Martha and Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing and continuing their search. The choice was made for them as red and blue lights flooded the room. Police! Hands where we can see them. As the officers burst in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment when all the lies, all the manipulation would finally come to light. Hours later, as dawn broke, I sat in our kitchen nursing a cup of coffee. The police had taken Martha, Sarah, and Thomas away in handcuffs, charged with breaking and entering, attempted theft, and a host of other crimes. Jake had shown up shortly after, wild-eyed and frantic, but instead of defending his family, he'd crumbled under questioning, admitting to his part in the scheme to steal Dad's inheritance. Claire? Mom's soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. The detective wants to speak with us again. I nodded, standing up. Let's finish this. In the living room, Detective Harris smiled warmly. Mrs. Edith, Miss Claire, I have good news. With Thomas's confession and the evidence we found at the scene, we have more than enough to ensure Martha, Sarah, and Jake face justice. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. What happens now? They'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, he assured us. And as for you two, you're free to live your lives without fear of further harassment. As the detective left, Mom and I stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling around us. I'm so proud of you, Claire, Mom said, her eyes glistening. Your father would be too. I felt tears welling up. I just wish he was here to see it. She pulled me into a hug. He is, sweetheart. In every brave decision you've made, in every moment you've stood up for what's right, he's here. As we held each other, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. We'd face the storm and come out stronger, our bond unbreakable. Later, as I stood on our new porch watching the sunset on this chapter of our lives, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. No more sacrificing my happiness for others. No more letting anyone dictate my worth. I was Claire, daughter, fighter, survivor. And this was my story, on my terms. As I turned to go inside to the warmth of the home we'd created, I smiled. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it held.